My name's Judy, I'm an architect by trade, and for years, that's all I cared about. Big buildings, fancy complexes, you name it, I designed it. And let me tell you, the money was good. Real good. I was all about my career, you know? Climbing that ladder, making a name for myself. And I did it, too. By the time I hit my mid-30s, I was at the top of my game. But something was missing. One day, I'm sitting in my fancy office, looking out over the city skyline I helped shape, and it hit me. I wanted a family, kids, a husband, the whole shebang. So there I was, 35 years old, and suddenly on the hunt for Mr. Right. And wouldn't you know it, I found him. We got married pretty quick. Tom, he was different from the guys I usually went for. He wasn't all about the money or the status. He was just real. One night, we're sitting on our tiny apartment balcony, sharing a bottle of cheap wine, when Tom turns to me and says, "Hey, Jude, yeah, he called me that, like the Beatles song, why don't you design us a house? Your dream house. We'll get some builders, make it happen. Design our own house?" It was like he'd read my mind. I'd spent years designing other people's dreams, but never my own. I was all over that idea like white on rice. So I got to work. Sketches, plans, 3D models, the works. We built that house, and it was everything I'd ever dreamed of. Open plan living area, huge windows to let in all that natural light, a kitchen that would make a celebrity chef jealous. It was us, in brick and mortar form. I was so proud of that house, I sent some photos to this fancy design magazine. Next thing I know, they're calling it the house of the year. Can you believe that? My house, our house, the best of the year. Life was good, you know? We had our dream house, our careers were going great. But something was still missing. We wanted a kid. We tried everything, tracking my cycle, special diets, you name it. Nothing. So we started with the doctors. Tests, and even more tests. But they all said the same thing, we were fine. We talked about other options. Adoption, IVF, all that stuff. But it didn't feel right for us. We decided if it happened, it happened. If not, well, we had each other, right? So we tried to move on. Focused on our careers, on each other. We traveled, we entertained, we lived. Little did I know, life was about to throw us another curveball. One that would change everything. It started with Tom feeling a bit off. Nothing major, just tired all the time, no appetite. We figured it was stress from work or something. But it didn't go away. We finally went to the doctor. I remember sitting in that sterile white room, holding Tom's hand as the doc came in. The look on his face. I knew it wasn't good news. Stomach cancer. Advanced. Those words hit like a freight train. From that moment on, our lives became a whirlwind of hospitals, doctors, and treatments. I threw myself into it, researching every possible cure, every experimental treatment. We traveled to the best clinics, spent a fortune on medicines. But cancer, it's a sneaky bastard. No matter what we tried, Tom just kept getting worse. I watched the man I loved, this strong, vibrant guy, waste away before my eyes. It was like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The end came faster than we expected. One minute he was there, squeezing my hand, telling me it would be okay. The next, he was gone. I was lost. Completely and utterly lost. The house that we'd built together, our dream home, it felt empty now. I tried to keep it together, I really did. But I was falling apart. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Work became impossible. I'd stare at blueprints for hours and not see a thing. My colleagues were worried, I could tell. But what could they do? What could anyone do? About a month after the funeral, I started feeling sick. Really sick. Couldn't keep anything down, not even water. At first, I thought it was just stress, you know? Grief does weird things to your body. But then this crazy thought hit me. What if I had cancer too? I know it sounds nuts. I mean, logically, I knew stomach cancer wasn't contagious. But grief isn't logical, is it? I panicked. Drove myself to the ER in the middle of the night, convinced I was dying. The doctors there, bless them, they were patient with me. Ran a bunch of tests to calm me down. And then the doc came in with the results. I braced myself for the worst. But instead, she smiled at me. "Congratulations," she said. "You're pregnant." Pregnant. After all those years of trying, after losing Tom, after everything. I was pregnant. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So I did both. Right there in the ER, surrounded by beeping machines and worried nurses, I laughed and cried like a crazy person. As I drove home that night, my hand on my still flat stomach, I made a promise. To myself, to Tom, to this little life growing inside me. I was going to be the best damn mom I could be. The pregnancy hit me like a ton of bricks. I mean, I'd heard stories about morning sickness and all that, but this? This was something else entirely. I could barely drag myself out of bed most days, let alone work on complex architectural projects. My boss, Jake, he tried to be understanding at first. "Take it easy, Judy," he'd say. "We've got you covered." But as the weeks dragged on and I kept missing deadlines, I could see the frustration in his eyes. One day, he called me into his office. I knew what was coming. "Judy," he said, leaning back in his chair, "we can't keep giving you the big projects if you can't deliver. I'm thinking we should move you to remote work, maybe scale back your responsibilities." I threw myself a pity party that night. Sat on the couch Tom and I had picked out together, eating ice cream straight from the tub and crying my eyes out. But then, I felt it. This tiny flutter in my belly. And just like that, I knew. This child, this little miracle growing inside me, was more important than any building I could ever design. More important than any career. The next day, I started looking for a new job. Something closer to home, something that wouldn't stress me out so much. I found a small construction company, just a few blocks from my house. The pay was, well, let's just say it was a far cry from what I was used to. But they were willing to work with my schedule, to be flexible with doctor's appointments and all that. I took the job, and you know what? It was the best decision I could have made. The months flew by. When the big day finally came, I swear I could feel Tom there with me. Cheering me on, telling me I could do this. And I did. After what felt like a lifetime of pain and pushing, their perfect little human was. As I held him for the first time, this wave of love washed over me. It was like nothing I'd ever felt before. Stronger than anything. In that moment, I knew I'd do anything for this little guy. Anything at all. I named him Thomas, after his dad. Tommy for short. And as I looked down at his sleeping face, I made another promise. I was going to give this kid the best life I possibly could. No matter what it took. The years flew by like pages in a flipbook. Before I knew it, Tommy was starting school, then middle school, then high school. And let me tell you, that kid was something else. Smart as a whip and athletic to boot. He'd come home with straight A's and trophies from track meets, grinning from ear to ear. "Look, Mom," he'd say, waving his report card or medal. "I did it." And every time, my heart would swell with pride. We didn't have much, but we had enough. A roof over our heads, food on the table, and each other. What more did we need? I made sure to be home when Tommy got back from school, to help with homework, to cheer him on at his meets. No late nights at the office for me, no sir. Tommy was my priority now. High school graduation came and went in a blink. Tommy, cap on his head and diploma in hand, beaming at me from the stage. I cried like a baby, of course. Couldn't help it. My little boy was all grown up. Then came college. Tommy got into a great school in another city. I was so proud of him, but man, it was hard to let him go. The house felt emptier than ever without him around. But you know what? It also gave me a chance to focus on myself again. I threw myself back into work, took on bigger projects. The money started flowing in again, and it felt good. I could help Tommy with his tuition, send him some extra cash for books and stuff. Every weekend, I'd hop in the car and drive to see him. We'd grab lunch, catch a movie, just hang out. It was different, sure, but it was still us. Still good. After graduation, Tommy decided to stay in the city. Got himself a good job and everything. I was happy for him, really I was. But a part of me missed having him close by. A few years went by like that. Me working hard, Tommy building his life in the city. Then one day, he called me up, sounding all excited. "Mom, I've met someone," he said. "Her name's Sarah. She's amazing, Mom. I think she might be the one." I was thrilled for him, of course. All I ever wanted was for Tommy to be happy. And from what he told me, this Sarah sounded perfect. Smart, beautiful, from a good family. Tommy was head over heels. But then things started to change. Tommy called me up one day, out of the blue. "Hey, Mom," he said, sounding a bit sheepish. "I was wondering, could you maybe help me out with buying a car? And, maybe send a bit more money each month? I want to take Sarah out, buy her nice things, you know?" I felt my heart sink a little. This wasn't like Tommy at all. He'd always been so responsible with money. "Honey," I said, trying to keep my voice gentle, "you know I'd do anything for you. But a car? And extra money for gifts? That's a lot to ask. You've got a good job. Why can't you save up for these things yourself?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Tommy spoke again, his voice was cold. "I thought you'd understand," he said. "I thought you'd want me to be happy. But I guess I was wrong." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, phone in hand, feeling like I'd just been slapped. After that, things were different. Tommy didn't call as often. When he did, our conversations were short, stilted. It felt like there was this wall between us now, all because I wouldn't buy him a car or fund his lavish dates. I tried to tell myself it was just a phase. That Tommy would come around, realize that love wasn't about fancy cars or expensive gifts. But as the weeks turned into months, and the phone calls got fewer and farther between, I couldn't help but worry. A year passed in a blink. Then one day, out of the blue, Tommy showed up on my doorstep. He wasn't alone. "Mom," he said, grinning from ear to ear, "I want you to meet Sarah. We're getting married." Sarah was everything Tommy had described, pretty, polite, the works. But there was something off. The way she looked at me, it was like I was some quaint little curiosity. Still, I plastered on a smile and welcomed them in. "Oh, what a lovely home," Sarah exclaimed, her eyes roving over every inch of the place. "It's so charming and comfortable." They stayed for dinner, chattering about wedding plans. Sarah's parents were footing the bill, apparently. As they talked, I couldn't help but notice how different Tommy seemed. Gone was my down-to-earth boy. In his place was this stranger, all flash and no substance. The wedding was, well, it was something else. More like a coronation than a marriage ceremony. I felt like a fish out of water, surrounded by all these fancy folks in their designer duds. Tommy barely had time to say hello, too busy schmoozing with Sarah's family and friends. After that, I threw myself into work. Took on big projects, worked longer hours. The money started piling up, and I had this crazy idea. I'd design a house for Tommy and Sarah, build it from the ground up. A wedding gift, you know? But something held me back. I decided to wait, see how things played out. Months went by. Then one day, Tommy and Sarah showed up again. "Mom," Tommy said, "we've been thinking. This house is too big for you alone. Why don't we move in? Keep you company?" I was over the moon. I helped them move in, rearranged things to make room. It felt good, having life in the house again. But that feeling didn't last long. A month in, and Sarah started throwing her weight around. Ordering me around in my own kitchen, demanding fancy meals and expensive wines. "Look," I said one day, trying to keep my cool, "this is still my house. I appreciate you being here, but..." Sarah cut me off with a shriek. "Tommy, did you hear how she spoke to me?" And to my shock, Tommy yelled at me. At me, his own mother. After that, things got real cold. They barely spoke to me, like I was some kind of ghost haunting my own home. Then one night, I overheard them talking. "We need to get rid of her," Sarah was saying. "This house is wasted on her." "Yeah," Tommy replied, and my heart nearly stopped. Mom's had her time. Maybe we should look into nursing homes. I couldn't believe my ears. My own son, plotting to throw me out of my home? The home I'd designed, that I'd raised him in? I stepped around the corner, fury boiling in my veins. "How dare you," I spat. Tommy looked shocked, then guilty. But one glance at Sarah, and his face hardened. "Mom," he said, his voice cold, "I think it's time for you to leave." That was it, the last straw. Leave? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh no, sweetheart. This is my house, my name on the deed. If anyone's leaving, it's you too." Tommy's face went red. "But Mom..." "No buts," I cut him off. "Pack your bags. Both of you." They tried to argue, but I stood firm. This was my house, damn it. As I watched them drive away, bags piled in the back of their fancy car, I felt empty. How had it come to this? Where had I gone wrong? The calm after the storm didn't last long. My phone started ringing off the hook, Tommy's name flashing on the screen every time. At first, I ignored it, but eventually, I picked up. "Mom," Tommy's voice was cold, calculated. "We need to talk about the house. It's half mine, by law. Dad left it to me too." I felt my blood pressure rising. "That's not true, Tommy. Your father left everything to me." "Well, I'm challenging that. I want half the value of the house. It's my right as Dad's son." He hung up on me, just like that. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling like the world was spinning out of control. I'd been planning to build them a house, for crying out loud. A wedding gift, a fresh start. But now I didn't want to give them a damn thing. I called up Jack, Tom's old friend from law school. Explained the situation, my voice shaking. "Judy," Jack said, his voice calm and reassuring. "You're in the clear legally. Tom's will left everything to you. No contest." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But Jack wasn't done. However, he continued, "If Tommy decides to sue, well, it could get messy. Expensive. And drawn out." I spent the next few weeks in a daze. I kept hoping Tommy would come to his senses, that his conscience would kick in. But the phone calls kept coming, each one more demanding than the last. Then, one morning, I woke up to a commotion outside. I peeked out the window and felt my heart stop. There, on my front lawn, was a giant "for sale" sign. I ran outside in my robe, not caring what the neighbors thought. And boy, were they curious. "Judy, you selling the place?" Mrs. Peterson from next door called out. "Moving to be closer to your son?" Mr. Johnson asked, pausing his morning jog. I stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. What could I say? That my son was trying to force me out of my own home? I tried calling Tommy, my fingers shaking as I dialed. Straight to voicemail. With a grunt of frustration, I yanked the sign out of the ground. It came up easier than I expected, nearly sending me tumbling backward. I dragged it into the garage, out of sight. Back in the house, I sank onto the couch, the same one where Tom and I used to sit, where I'd nursed Tommy as a baby. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't cry. I was Judy Goddamn Miller. I'd designed skyscrapers, for Pete's sake. I'd raised a child on my own. I'd faced worse than this. I was trying to relax that evening, curled up on the couch with a book I couldn't focus on, when I heard the front door open. My heart leapt. Was it Tommy, coming to his senses? But the voices I heard weren't just Tommy's. There were strangers in my house. I got up, my legs shaky, and made my way to the foyer. And there they were, Tommy, Sarah, and a couple I'd never seen before, all standing in my entryway like they owned the place. "And this is the living room," Tommy was saying, gesturing grandly. "Original hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows." The couple was nodding, looking impressed. "It's stunning," the woman said. "We'll take it. When can we move in?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Excuse me," I said, my voice quavering. "This house is not for sale. I'm going to have to ask you all to leave." Tommy's face twisted into something ugly. He turned to the couple and said, loudly, "Don't mind her. She's not well. Dementia, you know. Sad, really." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Tommy," I gasped. "How dare you?" But he talked over me, continuing his tour like I wasn't even there. My hands shaking, I grabbed my phone. "I'm calling the police," I announced. "All of you, out. Now." The couple looked uncertain, glancing between me and Tommy. Finally, they mumbled some excuses and headed for the door. As they left, Sarah turned to me, her eyes cold. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "You'll never see Tommy again. Or your grandchild." That's when I noticed it, the slight swell of her belly under her designer blouse. My grandchild. I was going to be a grandmother. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I barely noticed them leaving, the door slamming behind them. The next few months were a blur of courtrooms and sleepless nights. Tommy and Sarah, bankrolled by her parents, hired a team of slick lawyers. They threw everything they had at me, claims of mental incompetence, accusations of abuse against Tommy, you name it. I was exhausted. Bone deep, soul-crushing exhausted. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Eventually, I had to quit my job, I just couldn't keep up anymore. One afternoon, as I was bringing in the mail, more legal documents, of course, my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, came over. "Judy," she said, her kind face creased with concern. "Have you thought about going public with this? You know, telling your story on TV? Sometimes, sunlight is the best disinfectant." I brushed her off. It felt wrong, somehow, to air our dirty laundry in public. Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Listen, you old fool," Tommy's voice crackled over the line. "Just give up already. You're embarrassing yourself." Something in me snapped. The next day, I called the local news station. It was time to tell my story. The TV interview aired, and for a few days, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, old friends, even a few lawyers offering their services. I ignored them all. I was tired, so tired. Then, one afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I opened it, ready for another reporter, but instead found myself face to face with Sarah's parents. My heart sank. This was it, I thought. They're here to finish what Tommy and Sarah started. But to my shock, they looked ashamed. "Judy," Sarah's mother said, her voice barely above a whisper, we had no idea. We're so sorry." They came in, and over coffee, the whole story came out. They'd seen the TV interview, learned for the first time what their daughter and Tommy had been up to. The lawsuit, the attempts to sell my house, all of it. "We spoiled Sarah," her father admitted, shaking his head. "And now, well, she's always asking for money." They told me how they'd bought Tommy and Sarah an apartment. But Sarah had demanded a house instead. She said she'd handle it herself, her mother said, dabbing at her eyes. We had no idea this is what she meant. I sat there, stunned. I was going to build them a house," I said, my voice cracking. "As a wedding gift. But after all this, I just can't." Sarah's parents nodded, understanding in their eyes. "We're cutting them off," her father said firmly. "No more money. Not for lawyers, not for anything." True to their word, they did just that. Without the financial backing, Tommy and Sarah's case fell apart. The lawsuit was dismissed, and just like that, it was over. Months passed. I heard through the grapevine that Sarah had given birth to a little girl. The thought made my heart ache. More time went by. I threw myself back into work, trying to rebuild the life that had been put on hold. Then one day, out of the blue, there was a tap on the door. It was Tommy. The moment I opened, he burst into tears. "I'm so sorry," he sobbed. "I was selfish and stupid, and God, Mom, I had no idea how hard it was to be a parent. What you went through, raising me alone." I stood there, watching my son cry, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't even begin to untangle. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said finally. "What you did, it's going to take time to get past that. But I'd like to meet my granddaughter." We worked out an arrangement. I'd babysit sometimes, buy clothes and toys for the baby. It was a start. The first time I held little Emma, I felt my heart melt. She had Tommy's eyes, my nose. She was perfect. Over time, things, well, they didn't go back to normal. I don't think they ever could. But they got better. Sarah became less demanding, even thanked me once for my help. Tommy, he was trying. Really trying. Do I forgive him? I don't know. Some days, when I'm playing with Emma, seeing Tommy smile in hers, I think maybe I can. Other days, when the memory of what he did hits me, it feels impossible. But you know what? I'm not focusing on that right now. I'm just living, day by day. Enjoying my work, my home, my granddaughter. The future? Well, that'll sort itself out in time.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was. As the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.